Welcome to Study Session 3, Supply of Education. Introduction. In this study session, we will discuss the concept of supply as well as the supply of education. We will also state the law of educational supply. Finally, we will examine factors influencing the supply of education as well as the concepts of elasticity of educational supply. Learning outcomes. When you have studied this session, you should be able to explain the following concepts of supply: price, time, supply of education. Define educational supply schedule and draw a hypothetical educational supply schedule. 3. State the law of supply of education. 4. Give details of the factors that influence the supply of education. 5. Elucidate on the concept of elasticity of supply of education. Basic concept of supply. Supply. This is a quantity of a commodity, goods and services that producers are willing, able and ready to sell, put on the market for a given period of time and at a particular given price. The suppliers of educational services, who can be the public schools or the private schools, will be willing to make available quantities of educational services to whoever that demands for it. Dear students, you can see that at one time or the other, you had thought of enrolling for the distance learning program for your degree program. Here, the Distance Learning Center, DLC, is the supplier of educational services that you as a consumer demanded at a time and or the other. So, the DLC is willing to supply as many educational services to those students that are willing to consume some educational services at any time. Successful consumption of such services is dependent on the willingness and the ability of the student to pay the requisite fees. Price. This is the cost of value or worth of a given good that the supplier or the institution will make available to the students. The price or the cost is monetary, and that is the reason why you will ask your fellow lady how much did she pay for the school fees. The answer will be, I paid 67,777 naira 77 kobo. You might then go ahead to compare the school fees you paid to that of the Distance Learning Studies DLS of the University of Lagos. You will, based upon many factors best known to you, conclude that it is better you should continue with the DLC program of the University of Ibadan. You will still encourage many of your colleagues to even enroll on the DLC programs. Time. This is the exact amount in time at which the producer is ready to make the educational service available to the students. This might be in the 2013-2014 academic session or the 2014-2015 academic session. Invariably, the academic session during which you decided to start your course at the Distance Learning Center, University of Ibadan, and you have structured lectures is the time educational services is supplied to you by the DLC. You need to still remember that for each of our human activities that we undertake under the earth, there is a time. Let us now look at what is supply of education. Supply of education. This is a quantity of educational services that a producer, a school owner, is willing, ready, and able to make available to the consumers of educational services, children, youth, adults, physically challenged, and so on, at a given price and at a given time period. For example, if a school, primary, secondary, or tertiary institution advertises its educational products on the radio, television, or in the newspaper, it is one of the indicators that the school is getting ready to make available its educational services to the Nigerian public or consumers of various educational services. This will be done at a given price, school fees to be charged by the public or private institution, and also at a particular time, which can be 2013-2014 academic year or during the 2014-2015 academic year, as the case may be. The school owners will be ready to make available their educational services at a given fee and other fees and at a particular time. Educational supply schedule. A schedule is a table that shows both the price at which a product is supplied by the school operator and the quantity of educational service or of product that is demanded by the consumers or the individuals in the public. To this end, Educational Supply Schedule is a table that shows the various school prices, school fees, charged by the schools and the number of students that are enrolled in the various schools based on the different schooling prices charged. The table below shows the various schooling prices and the various enrollments of students in line with the different schooling prices. The schedule reveals that when the price of education school fees was 70,000 naira, the quantity of students, places that the educational producer will be willing to make available to the public is 800. When the school fees reduced to 50,000 naira, the quantity of educational services that the producer of education will be willing to make available will be reduced to 600 students' places. Remember that suppliers, especially private entrepreneurs, are into business to make as much profit as possible, while public school providers are into supply of educational services to render services. Though the public school providers will at one time or the other also charge some fees, which cannot be compared to the private education providers. You need to observe that as the school fee reduces, the number of students that enrolled are also reduced, especially if one considers the private entrepreneurs who are into schooling business to make a profit. This is how suppliers behave in response to the price increase and decrease. So, whenever there is an increase in the school fees, producers will react positively by making available more schooling spaces for the students. But if there is a reduced school fee, normally the producers will reduce their spaces available for students because their expected profit will also be reduced. Educational supply curve. The supply curve is a translation or representation of information, price and quantity on a supply schedule to a curve. The educational supply curve is a translation or representation of information on school fee and student enrollment that is shown on a schedule to a curve. The information on the schedule or table is represented below. From the educational supply curve, you can see that the curve slopes upwards from left-hand side to the right-hand side, depicting that when the school fee was very high, for example 70,000 naira, suppliers made available more schooling spaces for the consumers of education services, for example 800 in the school. But as the school fee was decreasing, the number of student spaces available was reducing. As you can see that when the school fees decreased to 60,000 naira, the student enrollment was 700 and so on. Just like the law of educational demand, do we have law of educational supply? Yes, we do. This is discussed in the next subsection. Law of educational supply. The law of supply expresses a relationship between the school fee charged and the number of students enrolled in schools. The school fee is one of the factors that influence education providers to make enrollment spaces available in schools. Economists of education have long deduced that the higher the school fee charged, the higher will be the enrollment spaces that education providers will be willing to make available to the public. You as students need to observe carefully that this principle law is applicable to the already stated law of educational supply above. The direct relationship between the price of a commodity, school fee, and the quantity supplied, student enrollment, is referred to as the law of educational supply. The direct relationship between the price of commodity, school fees, and the quantity supplied, student enrollment, is referred to as the law of supply, or better put, law of educational supply. Do you ever ponder if there is or are factors determining the supply of education? Yes, they are. Some of these factors are discussed below. Factors influencing supply of education. Resource quantity. In the educational sector, resources such as labor, capital, land, and entrepreneurship is needed for a successful delivery of educational service. How sufficient and available these resources are help the educational service supplier to supply enough. Take for example, if there is no enough land space where a school is established, it will affect the quantity of educational services that a provider will make available to the public. It is against this that the Nigerian government make as policy the land space that prospective school owners must have before embarking on the construction of schools. Prices of inputs used in production. How affordable are the prices of the resource inputs helps in determining the supply of educational services. If the price of resource input is very high, it might not be possible for the producer to supply the school spaces. This is because the burden of the high prices will be passed over to parents to bear, and this will be in form of hiked school fees. Availability of technology. The availability of technology in terms of information communication technology, computer, laptops, printers, and projector, and so on, helps in determining the supply of educational services to the consumers. If these technological facilities are available, it will make possible to a great extent the lesson deliveries in the class and invariably the supply of educational services by the knowledge supplier. Population. The availability of population in terms of size that is affected by births, deaths, migration makes the population to either be available in a large manner or a small manner. If the number of births is increasing, deaths reduce and migration is reduced, the number of population that will be available for schooling will be high. But if it is otherwise, whereby birth is reduced, death is increasing and migration out of the country is increasing, the number of population available for schooling will reduce. Reduction in population can also be as a result of emigration, wars, famine, diseases, and natural disasters. Speculation. This is speculation on the part of the educational providers, whereby he or she assumes or guesses that the consumers of education will demand the educational services that he has packaged together. In this wise, the provider will supply the educational service greatly if he is fortunate that his assumption works. Advertising or commercial activities. Embark on advertising or commercial activities are factors that determine the supply of educational places by education providers. While advertising, many people are made to be aware of the available educational services, and some prospective consumers will therefore demand the educational services provided by the supplier of educational services. How does educational supply respond to a little change, say in price? This constitutes the major focus of our next discussion on educational supply. Concept of elasticity of educational supply. The concept of elasticity was introduced to you under study session of educational demand. We will still examine the concept as it is applicable to supply of education. Remember very well that supply has to do with the supplier or producer of educational services to the public. Once again, as a student, you have seen an elastic at one time or the other, probably with your fashion designer. Also, if you have also used rubber band probably at home or in the office, it falls into this category and it is expandable in nature. This section therefore has to do with the elasticity of educational supply. Please remember that you can expand the elastic that you lay on your hand to any extent, and similarly the rubber band that you have on you. Additionally, remember that whenever you have reasons to transact business in the bank or with any financial institution, and you probably save or withdraw large sums of money, you would have used the rubber band to hold a large sum of money, or you will ask the bank teller to give you rubber band to hold firmly your money. Elasticity has to do with how someone can stretch, extend, elongate, make longer, and so on, the elastic that is on you. If we, however, apply what we have been examining to our discussion, that is the supply of education, the consumers can allow a large number of their children to attend schools or decide to reduce the number of their children that will attend school due to the changes in prices of education. This decision of allowing a large or small number of children to attend school or get enrolled in school based on the fees that are charged is called elasticity of educational demand. In simple terms, when there is a change in the price of education or school fees to be paid by students, the supplier, or otherwise called the producer, of education will also react in line with the change in the school fees. You need to know that the school fees can increase, and this will make the supplier be ready to supply more or make more spaces available for consumers of educational services. On the other way round, the supplier of educational services will also react negatively by reducing the available schooling spaces if there is a reduction in school fees that is charged, because of the fact that this reduction in school fees will adversely reduce the profits that will accrue to the educational service provider. Realistically, and in the real sense, I do not think we have come across such situations where schools, private or public, will reduce their school fees that are charged, when we can find a situation of non-increase of school fees instead of a reduction in the fees. Elasticity of supply of education can be less than 1, unitary or exactly 1, greater than 1. If elasticity of supply of education is less than 1, it implies that the responsiveness of supply of education in terms of making available schooling places to intended school entrants due to change in the school fees charged, positively or negatively, is less than 1, and so not too many observable changes in the availability of school places. If the responsiveness of the educational service provider is unitary, it means that the reaction of the supplier of education. So if the change in school fees is equal to 30% and the change or responsiveness of the educational service provider in terms of available school places is also 30%, then you can see that there is equality in the change in school fees and the change in available school places. Due to this equality in the two variables, school fees and available school places, we talk about unitary elasticity of supply of places. The formula for elasticity of educational supply is given as elasticity of supply of education, old school places, new school places, old school fees, new school fees. Example, if there is an increase in the price of education from 5,000 naira to 7,000 naira, the educational provider increases the available school places from 10,000 to 15,000. What is the elasticity of supply of education and the interpretation of the result? The result is 1.25 and it is greater than 1, otherwise called elastic elasticity of supply of education. It implied that when the school fees was increased, the education service provider reacted greater than increased school fees by providing more schooling places for the expected school entrants. There can be situations where the education service provider will not react up to 1, and this is called inelastic elasticity of supply of education, while finally the provider of education can react just in the same way the change in school fees was. This is called unitary elasticity of education supply. Study session summary. This study session looked at the supply of education, the various supply of education concepts, such as supply, price, time. It also defined supply of education and explained what educational supply schedule means. We also represented the educational supply schedule on the supply curve, while the law of educational supply was further stated. The various factors that influence the supply of education were explained. The concept of elasticity of educational supply was explored and how such elasticity could be calculated and the results properly interpreted accordingly. End of study session 3. Thanks for listening.